everybody, Mr. Lee here. In this video, we are going to go over free response questions and tips on how to score as many points as possible. And this is very specific to what we call the short answer paragraph questions. Okay, now there are multiple types of free response questions, but one of them is called the short answer paragraph. And I'll create a video for the rest of the types of the free response questions. Now, for these types of questions, they usually follow like a general outline on what you will see, and so you can utilize the tips from this video in order to get as many points as possible on the short answer paragraph type of question. All right, so here's a couple of things you know. For these types of questions, there's usually going to be little to no calculations that are required. There will be a very specific part of the question where you will be asked to answer the question, but in a paragraph type of form. And I'll show you exactly what kind of wording that they will use for that type of question. So here's another thing. Even though I said there will be no calculations that are required, you must be able to utilize some of the equations in order to explain your thoughts. And I'll go more into that in a little bit. And of course, the most important part, because we are a physics class, you got to be able to explain the physics. All right. Here's some tips. Now, the things that I have highlighted are the things I'm going to go into a little bit more detail with your own little slide. So first of all, you got to answer all parts of the question, okay? So if there's a part of the question that is part of the problem, you got to answer it. And I'll show you why that is the case. And the big reasoning behind it is if they have a very specific part of the question that they are asking for, usually there's a point value assigned to that one part of the question. So with that in mind, make a note on what you have to answer. Okay, so one of the hardest things about the AP Physics one free response questions is that there's a lot of information. There's diagrams, there's graphs, there's pictures, and there's like paragraph, right? There's a giant wall of text. And so it really helps you as you're reading it, make a mental note, write it down somewhere, okay? What are you actually answering? What is important there? So as you're reading and scanning through the text, you know, if they give you any numbers, if they give you keywords such as force, you know, spring, timer, like any kind of equipment kind of thing, or if they give you a graph, make a note of the y and the x-axis. What kind of graph is it, right? So all these things should be popping up into your head, and that really does help you parse through what you have to answer and how you should be answering them. All right, next, you got to answer all parts of the question. I can't emphasize this enough, and as you see on the screen, I put that down multiple times because it's that important. All right. Identify the parts and constants and equations required for the question. Now, this is very important. So as you're reading through it, you should make an effort to go to the equation sheet and find the equation that links to that problem, right? So one thing that you'll know is that the equation sheet is divided up into sections and parts. And those sections and parts are chunked by the unit. So for example, all the kinematics equations are together, right? All the rotational stuff is all linked together, right? All the energy stuff is all linked together. So all of the parts of the equation sheet are kind of just chunked together, and that is designed so that it's really there to help you out find what equations you need to use. So as you're reading it, make a mental note. All right, this question is asking about forces. This question is asking about energy, and you should be able to go to the equation sheet and find that equation. All right, and one of the most important things is do not waste time writing about anything other than the question. So one of the things that I learned as a reader is that a lot of the times students get in a really nasty habit of writing, and for whatever reason they just keep on writing. They don't stop writing, and that actually comes to hurt them in the end. I'll go into that a little bit more detail in a little bit. Okay, so be concise, no fluff, no extravagance. Answer the question. All right, and there's another slide that goes exactly what this means, but let me give you a general overview of what this means. As you are writing your paragraph response, if you write more than you have to, you fall into the trap of writing something about that's incorrect, right? And as you know, as you've experienced throughout this class, even though physics is something that we experience on a day-to-day, everyday basis, right? Physics describes how our world moves and operates. Actually putting those thoughts and ideas and those concepts down into words is a little bit more difficult. And so as you're writing, sometimes students fall into the trap of writing down incorrect physics. And as soon as you write down the incorrect physics, it kind of sounds as if a student is just writing down what they remember, what they learned, and then you're like, oh my gosh, they kind of lose that confidence, and they just keep on writing, and they keep on writing in hopes that the more they write, like hopefully they kind of get it right, like they get close to the bullseye. Now I'm here to tell you that that is a very, very, very bad strategy. Okay, answer the question, no other stuff. Once you feel that you have actually fully answered the question, you have to know when to stop, and that is to avoid the pitfall of writing things that are incorrect. Okay, that goes against the laws and the of physics. All right. And one of the more important ideas is, because it is a timed exam, writing more than you have to, simply put, it's just a waste of time. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of practice in identifying all parts of the question. So what I'm going to do is, you can pause the video right here. I'm not going to go too much into it, but what I want you to focus on is the lower part where it says part A. Look at part A. Okay, so as I'm reading through part A, I should be making like a little notes. I should be jotting down on a piece of paper what I have to be answering. It says on the dot below, which represents the block in figure 3, draw and label the forces. Pause right there. Boom. Draw and label the forces. They explicitly told you to do something. So if they told you to do something, there is usually a point value that is linked to that directive. If they told you to draw and label the forces, plural, okay, keep that in mind, plural, they give you a little hint. And that means that there is a point value that is attached, exerted on the block. Each force, okay, once again, they're giving clues. There's more than one force that's involved, must be represented by a distinct arrow starting on and pointing away from the dot. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and answer this, but what I want to do is I want to actually go into the answer key to show you exactly like what we did. We tried to figure out the answer key before actually answering the question. So you got to draw and label the forces. Boom. So in your mind, you should be thinking, okay, the rubric must have something about drawing and labeling forces. Okay. Plural. So here is the official rubric. You get a total of 2 points for this question. It says you get 1 point for including all 3 labeled forces on the block. All right, so what this means is that if you have those 3 forces, okay, once again, it has to be labeled, you get a point. All right, you get another point. It says for including at least one of the 3 forces exerted on the block with no extraneous forces. So that little term there, no extraneous forces, means that you didn't like just make up a force, or you didn't have like the normal force, because you know that's an extraneous force. It doesn't actually belong, right? So only the real forces. So if you answer this correctly, you can get a total of 2 points. If you kind of get it right? If you say, well, there's the force of gravity, I know that at least, you can get at least 1 point. And that is because you got some of the forces right. All right. So the big idea here is, yes, we want to get as many points as possible, especially for like a question like a free body diagram. But getting at least 1 out of the 2 is far, far, far greater than get a 0 out of the 2. And you can get that 1 out of 2 because you answered the question. All right. Next up. So this one is the actual paragraph part. Okay. And once again, I'm not going to go into how to answer this, but I do want to show you what you have to answer in order to get the points. So just as a heads up, the short answer paragraph is worth a total of 7 points, I believe. And so we already knocked 2 out of the 7 out of the way. Okay, so it says here, in a clear, coherent paragraph response that may also contain diagrams and or equations, so once again, the idea of the equation pops up, indicate why the total mechanical energy is increasing, decreasing, or constant for each of the following listed below. Okay, so there's 3 systems, right? There's 3 scenarios. So what that means is you have to be able to, one, you have to write it in a paragraph. They told you that, and we'll go into that later. You got to indicate why the total mechanical energy is increasing, decreasing, or constant for those 3 things. So what this means is that as you are writing about your physics, right, you have to be talking about the mechanical energy of system 1. You have to be talking about the mechanical energy of system 2. You have to be talking about the mechanical energy for system 3. So if you do that correctly, you have a higher chance of getting the points. Even if you're wrong, you have a chance of getting the points because you're following their prompt. Okay, and also they have a little caveat here. They want you to be very specific in what kind of language you need to use. Okay, so make sure you pay attention to that. So let's take a look at the answer key. So as you see, this is the answer key for that problem. You get 1 point for indication of the mechanical energy. Okay, for the block. So once again, you talk about the mechanical energy for the block, point. Okay, you get another point. So I believe this is for system 1. Okay, you get a point for talking about system 1. So that's total of 2 points. You get a point for talking about system 2. 2 points. Oh, this one is for system 2, excuse me. This one is for system 3, and this one is for system 1. Okay, so just like I said, if you talked about all 3 systems, you can get a point for every single one, if you get it correctly, of course. So that's a total of 4 points. And the very last point that you can earn is writing in a paragraph format, and I'll go into that next. Okay, so whenever you see this phrase, this is what is the short answer paragraph response. It says in a clear, coherent paragraph length response. Okay, if you ever see that phrase, this is what they're looking for. Once again, if you do this correctly, it is a easy point. These are always worth 1 point. But in order to get it, you have to match their criteria. Okay, so it has to be coherent and organized. Okay, so you're looking at the situation and you're thinking things through in an organized fashion. You're not just like writing down everything you know about springs and blocks and mechanical energy. That's not what they want. They want you to be able to actually think your way through and write down your thoughts. You got to talk about physics principles, which includes laws, theories, and equations, right? Conservation of energy, conservation of momentum, all that good stuff. And once again, equations are a good way to reference these laws and theories, because a lot of our equations come from those laws and those theories. It must be presented clearly to the reader, so that it makes sense on the first reading. Now, this is very important because the AP readers, they read tons and tons of the same exact question. They don't go through the entire test, but they're assigned one question and they grade just that one question. Okay, so while they're reading their response to that one question, it should make sense because they have to go through so many of these questions. So if they're like, what are they talking about? You're not going to get that easy point. Okay, so it has to be clear and concise. And the last one, you got to explain like a paragraph. Okay, don't just put down an equation and not reference it. If you put down an equation, you have to reference it. Like you have to say, you know, this is my equation that I'm using, like, and this is a reason why, and explain that equation and why it makes sense to your problem. Because if you just write down an equation and don't reference it, it kind of looks like you're just scrambling. You're just scrambling to get as many points as possible, and it is very apparent, and you won't get this point for it. Okay. And leading to the no point idea. Ideas are not presented in logical order, right? You just say whatever comes to your mind about the topic. It's a lengthy digression within an argument. So this is what I'm talking about the pitfalls, just writing and writing and writing and writing without a clear goal in sight. So if that happens to you, you're not going to get this point because you're like, this student is just rambling here. And if you just put down an equation without making any references to it. And this also includes like diagrams as well. All right. Okay. So this is the short answer paragraph. It is worth a total of 7 points. Okay. As a reminder from back here, make sure you answer all parts of the questions. Make sure you know what you have to answer. And the most important part is you try your best. All right. I'll see you next time. I'm going to talk about the other kinds of free response questions. Bye-bye.